My father fired me after believing my sister's lies. "You're no longer my daughter," he shouted. 6 months later, I gave him the evidence that ruined everything, and now my sister is begging for help. Never in my life did I imagine myself composing a narrative like this. For years I'd scrolled through endless threads on platforms like Reddit, absorbing tales of familial betrayal and cutthroat workplace dramas. Each time, I'd feel a quiet surge of gratitude that my own life was untouched by such turmoil. My family was a bastion of closeness. My career, a trajectory of unwavering success. And my bond with my father? It was a treasure I held above almost all else. Then, 6 months ago, everything I cherished crumbled within the span of a single afternoon. My name, in this context, is irrelevant, but the harrowing experience that befell me might just illuminate a path for someone else to recognize the warning signs before their own world implodes. I am 31 years old, and until recently, I held the distinguished title of Vice President of Operations at Donovan & Associates. This mid-sized consulting firm was more than just a business. It was a testament to my father, Frederick Donovan's, indomitable spirit. He built it from absolutely nothing over 3 decades, starting in a cramped garage with a solitary client, and meticulously grew it into an enterprise employing over 200 people across 3 states. Growing up, I witnessed firsthand his relentless devotion. Weekends, holidays, countless late nights, he poured every ounce of his being into constructing something enduring. My mother, Beatrice, was his steadfast anchor through every struggle, every painful setback, and every hard-won triumph. She championed his vision when others dismissed it, and together, they forged not merely a company, but a powerful legacy. My only sibling is my older sister, Francesca, who is 34. She is married to a man named Damian Holloway, and they have a bright, 7-year-old son, Adrian. To the casual observer, Francesca's life appeared idyllic, a beautiful suburban home, a successful husband, an adorable child. Yet I harbored a truth that no one else seemed to perceive. Francesca had always carried a deep-seated resentment towards me. Our rivalry was a seed planted in childhood. I was the academic one, the daughter who consistently brought home straight A's, earned scholarships, and swelled our parents' chests with pride at every graduation ceremony. Francesca, however, charted a different course. She struggled academically, dropped out of college after just 2 semesters, and drifted between various jobs throughout her 20s. Our parents, I genuinely believe, loved us both equally. But Francesca, in her own perception, interpreted every one of my successes as a direct measure of her personal failures. When I joined the family business 8 years ago, fresh out of my MBA program, Francesca's displeasure was palpable. She herself had attempted a tenure at Donovan & Associates years prior, but it was short-lived. She branded it a toxic environment, and resigned after just 6 months. The unvarnished truth, recounted by everyone who worked there at the time, was that she'd been caught padding her expense reports, and our father, in a quiet act of protective grace, had allowed her to resign rather than face formal repercussions. Francesca never forgave him for that, and she certainly never forgave me for thriving where she had faltered. What I utterly failed to grasp then was that Francesca had maintained covert relationships with a handful of employees, mostly administrative staff, individuals largely unaware of the true circumstances of her departure. She'd occasionally drift by, bearing cookies for the reception desk, exchanging pleasantries with the security guards. Everyone perceived her as merely friendly. Looking back now, the chilling realization dawns: she was meticulously cultivating access, ensuring her presence remained familiar enough that no one would question her motives when the opportune moment arrived. For 8 dedicated years, I poured my soul into that company. Despite my advanced education, I insisted on starting in the lowest entry-level position, determined to learn the business from its very foundation. My father, recognizing my conviction, agreed. My first 2 years were spent doing everything imaginable, answering phones, shadowing project managers, even sitting silently in client meetings where I was explicitly forbidden to speak. I was resolute in my desire to earn my place, not merely inherit it. By year 5, I had ascended to Director of Client Services. By year 7, I was the VP of Operations, orchestrating the daily functioning of all 3 offices. My father and I developed an almost telepathic rhythm. He handled the grand strategic vision and crucial client relationships, while I deftly managed the intricate internal operations that kept everything running like a well-oiled machine. Those were truly good years. Arduous, yes, but undeniably good. The first ominous tremors began last fall, around September, when Francesca suddenly re-emerged into my father's life with an unsettling intensity. She'd been largely distant for years, appearing only for holidays and an occasional birthday. Then, almost overnight, she was calling our parents daily, dropping by the house multiple times a week, bringing Adrian over for impromptu visits. At first, I found it heartwarming. Perhaps Francesca was finally maturing, finally ready to shed old grudges and mend our familial bonds. Our mother was ecstatic, having always mourned the chasm between her daughters. She began dreaming aloud of family vacations and rekindling childhood holiday traditions. I should have been more vigilant. The transformation was too abrupt, too complete. But I desperately wanted to believe in redemption. I wanted to believe my sister had, at last, grown up. What I didn't know was that Francesca was drowning. Damien's business had collapsed spectacularly, entangled in a lawsuit from a former partner and burdened by massive, hidden debts that he'd concealed even from my sister. They were on the precipice of losing their home. Their life savings had evaporated. And Francesca, instead of approaching our family with honesty and seeking help, had concocted a chillingly different plan. She was going to take my place. Not literally, of course. She understood she lacked the qualifications for a VP role. But if I were disgraced and removed, she could then skillfully position herself as the loyal daughter who had courageously uncovered the betrayal. She could ingratiate herself with our father, become indispensable as a consultant, guiding the transition, and eventually leverage that strategic position into something far more permanent. Meanwhile, she and Damien would utilize the stolen information to generate enough cash to extricate themselves from their crushing financial abyss. The first tangible sign of impending disaster arrived in early November. I was deep in a meeting with our CFO, scrutinizing quarterly projections, when my assistant quietly interrupted, relaying my father's urgent request to see me. His tone was strange, she whispered. Cold. I found him in his office, door shut, seated behind his desk with his hands rigidly clasped. The expression on his face was one I'd never seen directed at me before. Profound disappointment laced with something far harder, something that resembled raw disgust. Sit down, he commanded, his voice devoid of any warmth. I complied, my heart already hammering against my ribs. Dad, what's wrong? He slid a folder across the desk towards me. Inside were printouts of emails purportedly from my company account, emails I had never, ever written. They depicted correspondence with a competitor, discussing confidential client information, proprietary pricing strategies, and internal projections. The final email in the stack was a blatant demand for payment, instructing the competitor to wire $50,000 to an offshore account in exchange for continued intelligence. Explain this, my father said, his gaze piercing. I couldn't speak. My mouth opened, but no sound escaped. The emails were transparently fake. They had to be. Yet, they appeared flawlessly authentic. My email signature, my unmistakable writing style, even subtle references to real meetings and real clients that only someone with intimate internal knowledge would possess. Dad, I didn't write these. I finally managed, my voice a ragged whisper. Someone fabricated them. I would never. Francesca brought these to me this morning, he interjected, his voice thick with a wounded emotion. She found them on your work computer when she stopped by the office to surprise you with lunch. My blood ran cold. Francesca had been at the office? On my computer? She was heartbroken. My father continued, oblivious to the implications. She kept saying she must be wrong. That there had to be an explanation. But there it is, isn't it? Right in front of us. Dad, please listen to me, I pleaded. I have never communicated with any competitor about confidential information. Those emails are forged. Someone planted them on my computer or fabricated them entirely. He shook his head slowly, and in that agonizing moment, I watched something precious die in his eyes. His absolute trust in me, painstakingly built over 31 years, crumbled in real time. Your sister has no reason to lie. She's been nothing but supportive of you, even when you succeeded in ways she never could. And you believed her? Just like that, without even asking me first? The injustice was a physical blow. The evidence speaks for itself, he retorted. I stood then, my chair screeching against the floor, a guttural sound mirroring the turmoil inside me. No, it doesn't. Evidence can be manufactured. Emails can be spoofed. Someone is setting me up, and the fact that Francesca just happened to find this evidence on my computer should tell you exactly who that someone is. My father rose as well, and his face transformed into something I scarcely recognized. How dare you? He thundered. How dare you accuse your sister of such a thing? She has done nothing but try to repair this family. And now you're going to turn this around on her to save yourself? I'm telling you the truth, I insisted. You're telling me lies! He was shouting now, his voice reverberating off the walls of the corner office he'd occupied for a quarter-century. I built this company from nothing. I gave you every opportunity, every advantage. And this is how you repay me? By selling our secrets to competitors? I didn't do this, Dad. Please, you have to believe me. His next words landed like a series of devastating physical blows. You're fired. Clear out your desk and leave the building. And as far as I'm concerned, you're no longer my daughter. The world tilted. I instinctively grasped the edge of his desk to steady myself, utterly unable to process the horrifying finality of his decree. My father, the man who had patiently taught me to ride a bike, who had proudly walked me down the aisle at my college graduation, who had told me every single day that he was proud of me, was now staring at me like I was a complete stranger, like I was something repulsive he'd accidentally stepped on. Dad, get out. I left. What else could I do? Security personnel, their faces impassive, escorted me to my office, watched me pack a solitary box of personal belongings, and then shadowed me to the parking garage as if I were a common criminal. I drove home in a daze, barely able to navigate the road through the blurring haze of my tears. The ensuing weeks were a torturous blur of pain. My mother called once, her voice thick with tears, admitting she didn't know what to believe but desperately needed time. My calls to my father were consistently routed to voicemail. Francesca, meanwhile, apparently stepped seamlessly into my void at the company. Not officially, perhaps, but she was suddenly helping out, while they purportedly searched for my replacement. And somehow, that temporary arrangement kept extending. I wanted nothing more than to collapse, to retreat into my bed and never emerge. Every morning, I woke with a jolt, forced to reaffirm my innocence, because the sheer weight of my father's accusation made me feel guilty, even though I knew, deep down, I had done nothing wrong. The loneliness was suffocating. Friends I'd known for years suddenly became unavailable. Industry contacts abruptly stopped returning my calls. Word, as always, spread like wildfire in consulting circles. And the insidious narrative my father had allowed to circulate, that I'd been terminated for ethical violations, followed me like an inescapable shadow. People who had celebrated my birthdays, toasted my promotions, and proclaimed my destiny for greatness, now conspicuously crossed the street to avoid making eye contact. I couldn't even properly defend myself, as the specific details of my termination were supposedly confidential, which only allowed the rumors to fester and grow wilder with each retelling. My apartment transformed into both sanctuary and prison. I ceased cooking proper meals, subsisting instead on cold takeout containers and forgotten cups of coffee while I stared blankly at the walls. Sleep came in fractured fragments, interrupted by recurring nightmares where my father's voice echoed endlessly. You're no longer my daughter. You're no longer my daughter. One night, roughly 3 weeks after my termination, I found myself standing on my balcony at 2 a.m., watching the city lights blur through tears I couldn't seem to staunch. The thought, just for a fleeting moment, crossed my mind that it would be easier to simply vanish, to allow everyone to believe the lie, to embrace defeat, to simply fade away into nothingness. That thought, chillingly, terrified me more than anything Francesca had done. The very next morning, I called a therapist. Dr. Elizabeth Winters had been highly recommended by a former colleague, and remarkably, she had availability that same week. Walking into her office felt like an admission of absolute defeat, but it turned out to be the crucial first step toward reclaiming my life. "You're experiencing acute trauma," she told me during our second session, her voice calm and empathetic. "Your identity was intricately built around your family and your career, and both were stripped away simultaneously by people you trusted implicitly. The grief you're feeling is profound and valid. It feels like I'm mourning someone who died," I admitted, the words catching in my throat. "Except they're all still alive. They just chose to stop loving me." Dr. Winters gently helped me understand that healing and fighting could, in fact, happen simultaneously. I didn't have to wait until I felt completely whole again to embark on the pursuit of justice. In fact, she suggested, the very pursuit of truth might be an integral part of my journey to wholeness. But I'm not a person who gives up easily, I thought, a flicker of my old self igniting. My father, ironically, had instilled that much in me. I started digging. I hired a forensic IT consultant named Oscar Tanner, a former FBI cybercrime specialist who now operated in the private sector. His firm specialized in digital forensics for civil litigation, and crucially, he possessed established relationships with law enforcement that would prove invaluable. I meticulously explained the situation, presented him with the damning printed emails, and asked him pointedly if there was any conceivable way to prove they had been fabricated. Oscar was cautiously pragmatic at first. "It depends on how sophisticated the forgery is," he stated. "If someone truly knows what they're doing, it can be almost impossible to detect." "I'll pay whatever it costs," I asserted, my resolve firm. "Take as long as you need." Working with Oscar provided me with something I desperately needed: structure. We met every Tuesday morning at a quiet coffee shop near his office, meticulously reviewing findings, strategizing our next steps, and painstakingly building our case piece by piece. He treated me not as a victim, but as a colleague, an equal partner in this arduous quest. And that professional respect, more than anything, helped me remember the person I had been before everything shattered. "Your sister made mistakes," Oscar observed during one of our early meetings, a wry twist to his lips. "Criminals usually do. The truly smart ones know how to cover their tracks completely, but most people wildly underestimate how much digital evidence they leave behind. They mistakenly believe deleting a file means it's gone forever, or that using someone else's computer makes them invisible. It doesn't." He smiled grimly. "Almost nothing is ever truly gone. Data has a way of persisting in places people don't expect. Server logs, backup systems, metadata embedded in files. Visitor logs, badge records, ISP routing data. If your sister did this, she left fingerprints. We just have to find them." The investigation consumed my days. When I wasn't meeting with Oscar or meticulously reviewing documents, I was meticulously reconstructing my own timeline. Every meeting, every email, every phone call from the months preceding my termination. I created elaborate spreadsheets tracking Francesca's movements, cross-referencing her visits to the office with any unusual activity detected on my computer. The work was painstaking and often heartbreaking, but it relentlessly kept me focused on something beyond my crippling pain. My mother called occasionally during those months. The conversations were awkward, punctuated by long, uncomfortable silences and carefully constructed non-statements. She yearned to maintain a relationship with me without openly taking sides, which tragically meant she couldn't acknowledge my innocence or Francesca's guilt. I understood her position intellectually. She was desperately trying to preserve both her daughters. But emotionally, her neutrality felt like yet another profound betrayal. "Your father misses you," she ventured during one call, about 2 months into my agonizing exile. He doesn't say it, but I can tell. He sits in his study and stares at the photos from your graduation. If he misses me, he knows where to find me. I replied, my voice flat. He's stubborn. You know that. She sighed. He's convinced himself that he made the right decision. And admitting otherwise would mean admitting he destroyed his own daughter's life based on lies. Yes, I said, a bitter edge to my tone. I imagine that would be uncomfortable for him. She sighed again. I'm not excusing what he did. I'm just trying to explain. I don't need explanations, Mom, I stated firmly. I need someone in my family to believe me. She couldn't give me that, and in that moment we both knew it. We ended the call with hollow promises to talk soon that neither of us truly believed. Over the next 6 grueling months, Oscar became my indispensable secret weapon. He managed to obtain copies of the email server logs through legitimate legal channels. My attorney, a sharp and formidable woman named Veronica Sanchez, greatly facilitated this by filing a preservation request and threatening immediate litigation, which compelled the company to retain and produce the crucial records. Oscar also submitted formal requests to the building management company for visitor logs and electronic access records, which they were legally mandated to maintain for insurance and liability purposes. Meanwhile, I desperately needed income. I had accumulated substantial savings during my years at Donovan and Associates, but I was unwilling to sit idly by and watch them dwindle, especially with Oscar's fees steadily mounting. I reached out to a former colleague named Naomi, who had left the company years prior to establish her own thriving consulting firm. She had, of course, heard the industry rumors about my departure. Everyone had. But she knew me well enough to ask for my side of the story. The whole thing smells wrong, she declared after I recounted my ordeal. You're the most ethical person I've ever worked with. You literally reported yourself once for accidentally taking a company pen home. I managed a weak laugh despite myself. I remember that. You thought I was insane. I still do. She grinned. But that's precisely why I know you didn't do what they're saying you did. Naomi offered me a consulting position, initially off the books, assisting her with operations strategy. It wasn't VP-level work, but it was something, a purpose, a reason to haul myself out of bed each morning. As the months painstakingly passed, Oscar began uncovering crucial threads of truth. The emails had indeed been sent from my computer, but the timing was deeply suspicious. They were all dispatched during a 2-week period when I had been away, traveling for work in Montana. Furthermore, the login records clearly indicated access from an IP address that did not correspond to any of my known devices or usual locations. The email server logs explicitly included the originating IP addresses for each message, and none of them traced back to the hotels or client sites where I had demonstrably been. More damningly, Oscar discovered that someone had surreptitiously installed remote access software on my work computer. The installation date corresponded exactly with the very day Francesca had visited the office, ostensibly to bring me lunch, though I hadn't been present to receive it. How would she have gotten onto my computer? I asked, my voice barely a whisper, when Oscar explained this chilling detail. It's password protected. He pulled up another document. According to the access logs, someone entered your password correctly on the first attempt. No failed tries. That means either she knew your password already, or someone gave it to her. I felt a wave of nausea. My password was a combination of my mother's birthday and my childhood pet's name, information Francesca would have known with ease. I'd never considered using something more secure because I trusted my family implicitly. She knew it, I said quietly, the realization a bitter taste in my mouth. She would have been able to guess it. Someone gave themselves backdoor access to your machine. Oscar explained further. They could log in remotely, send emails as you, access your files, anything they wanted. Can you prove it was Francesca? He hesitated. The remote access came from an IP address registered to a residential internet service provider. I can see what neighborhood the service address is in based on the ISP's regional routing data, and it's entirely consistent with your sister's area. But to get the exact street address, I'd need a court order to compel the ISP to release subscriber information. It wasn't yet ironclad proof, but it was more than enough to propel us forward. During month 4, I hit a demoralizing wall. The investigation had stalled. We possessed strong circumstantial evidence pointing squarely at Francesca, but nothing that would definitively hold up in court or, more critically, convince my father beyond a shadow of a doubt. Oscar was juggling other cases and couldn't dedicate unlimited time solely to mine. My savings were slowly dwindling despite the consulting income from Naomi. The immense weight of uncertainty was crushing me. I called Dr. Winters in a panic one evening, utterly convinced I was about to lose everything all over again. What if I never prove it? I asked, my voice shaking uncontrollably. What if she gets away with this forever? What if I spend the rest of my life knowing the truth, but being utterly unable to make anyone else see it? Dr. Winters was quiet for a moment, letting my despair hang in the air. Let me ask you something, she finally said. If you never prove it, if the evidence never fully materializes, will you know in your heart what the truth is? Of course, I said without hesitation. I know I didn't do this. Then that knowledge belongs to you, regardless of what anyone else believes. Your integrity isn't determined by external validation. You know who you are. Your father made a choice, a terrible one, based on incomplete information and emotional manipulation. That choice reflects on him, not on you. You're not responsible for his inability to see the truth. The conversation, though it solved nothing practically, shifted something profound inside me. I'd been so fixated on vindication, on proving myself to others, that I'd forgotten I didn't actually need their approval to be whole. I knew my truth. That fundamental foundation couldn't be taken from me. 2 weeks later, Oscar called with news that fundamentally altered everything. The monumental breakthrough arrived in month 5. Oscar had miraculously managed to trace the offshore account referenced in the fabricated emails, the very account where my supposed $50,000 payment was to be sent. Whoever orchestrated the forgery had made a critical, amateurish mistake. They'd used a real account number, one that had, in fact, received wire transfers from an anonymous source. That anonymous source? A shell company ultimately traced back to Damian Holloway, Francesca's husband. Oscar meticulously explained his methodology. The offshore account was registered in a jurisdiction that mandated nominee directors, but they had grown sloppy. The formation documents for the shell company listed an email address for correspondence, and that email domain was registered to Pinecrest Holdings LLC, a Delaware shell company. Delaware law, conveniently, requires listing an incorporator on formation documents, and Damian Holloway had signed his own name as incorporator. He likely hadn't realized those records are publicly searchable. They hadn't just framed me, they had actually committed the very crime they'd accused me of, using my identity to do it. The $50,000 wasn't a fantasy. It had genuinely been paid for information that had genuinely been stolen. The competitor in question had verifiably received confidential Donovan and Associates data, and they had paid for it, under the belief that they were paying me. The real criminals had been Francesca and Damian all along. When Oscar delivered his final, comprehensive report, I sat in his office for nearly an hour, rendered speechless. The evidence was overwhelming, not merely suggestive, but definitively conclusive. Every single piece connected seamlessly to every other piece, forming an irrefutable chain of culpability that led directly to my sister's door. How did they think they'd get away with this? I finally managed to croak. Oscar leaned back in his chair, a knowing look in his eyes. They probably assumed the investigation would simply halt once you were fired. Most companies don't dig deeper after they've found a scapegoat. It's far easier to cut your losses and move on than to admit you might have made a catastrophic mistake. Your father was never supposed to question the evidence. And Francesca knew that. She knew exactly how he'd react. She counted on it. The entire malevolent scheme hinged entirely on my father's willingness to believe the worst about me based solely on her word. Had he taken even the most basic steps to verify, had the IT department checked the email headers, for instance, the forgery would have been blindingly obvious within hours. The sheer cruelty of it hit me afresh. Francesca hadn't just framed me, she'd weaponized our father's love against me. She'd mercilessly exploited his guilt about their fractured relationship, his desperate desire to believe she'd changed, his ingrained tendency to make swift decisions based on raw emotion rather than reasoned evidence. She had studied him with the cold precision of a predator stalking its prey. "What happens now?" I asked, my voice tinged with a new steel-like resolve. Oscar slid the thick folder across the desk. "Now you decide what to do with it. You can take this to law enforcement, and let them handle the prosecution. You can file civil suits against your sister and her husband. You can present it directly to your father and let him deal with the monumental fallout internally." He paused, allowing the gravity of his words to sink in. "Or you can do all three." I immediately took this comprehensive information to Veronica, my attorney. She meticulously reviewed everything Oscar had compiled, then sat back in her chair with a low, impressed whistle. "This is solid. We can go to the police, or we can go directly to your father. What do you want to do?" I had fantasized about this moment for months, truly fantasized about it. The vindication, the look of dawning horror on my father's face when he realized his grave error. I'd imagined him groveling for my forgiveness, my sister being dragged away in handcuffs, the entire company bearing witness to my triumphant return. But fantasy and stark reality are profoundly different things. I want to confront them together. I stated, my voice firm. My father needs to hear the truth from me, and Francesca needs to be there when he does. Veronica nodded slowly. "It's risky. If your sister knows you have evidence, she might try to run or destroy documents." "She won't run," I countered, a chilling certainty in my tone. "She's too arrogant for that. She thinks she got away with it." I was right. When I called my mother and asked her to arrange a family dinner, my first direct contact with my family in 6 agonizing months, she was overjoyed. "Oh, sweetheart, your father will be so happy. He's been miserable, even if he won't admit it." "I'm sure he has," I said, my voice meticulously neutral. "Can you make sure Francesca and Damien are there, too? I have some things I need to say to the whole family." My mother, ever the peacemaker, agreed without question. She had always believed that any wound, no matter how deep, could be healed with enough love and time. The week leading up to that dinner was the longest of my life. I meticulously rehearsed what I would say, envisioning every possible response, every potential objection. I created multiple backup copies of all the damning evidence and stored them in 3 separate, secure locations: my apartment, a safety deposit box, and Veronica's office. Paranoia, I realized, had become second nature. Naomi, my former colleague, took me shopping for what she playfully dubbed my vindication outfit, a sharp charcoal gray blazer and matching slacks that projected an air of professional composure and unyielding strength. "You want to walk in there looking like the CO you should have been this whole time," she declared. "Let them see exactly what they carelessly threw away." I barely slept the night before. My mind relentlessly cycled through the myriad possibilities. What if Francesca simply denied everything? What if my father still chose to believe her? What if the dinner descended into utter chaos before I could even present my irrefutable evidence? What if I broke down crying and couldn't finish what I had come to say? At 4 p.m. on Saturday, I stood outside my parents' house for the first time in half a year. The garden looked precisely the same as always. My mother's beloved roses climbing the trellis, the stone path my father had painstakingly laid himself 2 decades prior. This had once been my sanctuary. These people had been my unshakable foundation. I took 3 deep, fortifying breaths and then, with a heavy heart, rang the doorbell. The dinner was scheduled for a Saturday evening, almost precisely 6 months to the day after I had been unceremoniously fired. I arrived at my parents' house, a thick folder clutched firmly under my arm, the very same way my father had delivered my professional death sentence. Tonight, I would deliver his awakening. Inside the folder lay Oscar's complete, meticulously detailed report, Veronica's concise summary, undeniable bank records, precise IP logs, and the chilling installation records for the remote access software. Everything was documented and utterly undeniable. Francesca was already there when I walked in, her arm linked possessively with Damien's, her smile wide and disconcertingly welcoming. "Little sister, it's so good to see you. We've missed you so much." The sheer audacity of her performance nearly stole my breath. She truly believed she had won. My father stood stiffly in the living room, a drink in his hand, watching me with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. My mother rushed forward, her face already streaked with tears, and embraced me tightly. I allowed her to hold me for a long, poignant moment before gently disentangling myself. "Can we sit down?" I said, my voice steady, though my heart pounded. "There's something I need to share with all of you." We gathered in the living room, my parents occupying one couch, Francesca and Damien on the other, while I stood deliberately in the center, not like a defendant in a courtroom, but more accurately, like a prosecutor about to deliver her closing arguments. 6 months ago, I began, my voice clear and unwavering. I was fired from the company I dedicated 8 years of my life to. I was accused of corporate espionage, of selling confidential information to competitors, of betraying everything our family has meticulously built. My father's jaw visibly tightened, but he remained silent. I was also disowned. My own father looked me in the eye and told me I was no longer his daughter. My voice cracked slightly on those words, but I pushed forward, refusing to falter. I've spent every single day since then trying to comprehend how he could believe such a thing about me, how he could so carelessly throw away 31 years of love and trust based on emails that anyone could have forged. The evidence was clear. My father interjected stiffly. The evidence was fabricated. I opened the folder, my movements deliberate, and began laying the damning documents on the coffee table. "This," I declared, placing the first document down, "is a forensic analysis of the email server logs. It proves that those emails were sent from my computer using remote access software. Software that was specifically installed on my machine on October 15th of last year, a day when I was in Montana at a client's site." I glanced pointedly at Francesca. Her wide smile had frozen, a chilling rictus. "Do you know who was in the office that day? Who stopped by to bring me lunch, even though I wasn't there?" I laid down another document. "This is a visitor log from building security. Every guest has to sign in at the front desk and badge through the turnstiles. Francesca signed in at 2:47 p.m. and signed out at 3:23 p.m. The building management company retains these logs for 1 year for liability purposes. And here's the electronic badge record from the turnstile system, showing her visitor pass accessing the 4th floor where my office is located. Plenty of time to install the software that gave her remote access to my computer." "This is ridiculous," Francesca blurted, but her voice had gone thin, a mere wisp of its former confidence. "You're making things up to blame me for your mistakes." "Am I?" I asked, my gaze unwavering. I laid down the bank records next. "This is a wire transfer record, showing $50,000 paid to an offshore account. The account is owned by a shell company called Pinecrest Holdings LLC. Pinecrest Holdings is registered to a man named Damien Holloway." "Your husband?" Damien's face went utterly white. My mother pressed a trembling hand to her mouth, a silent gasp escaping her lips. My father stared at the documents, as if they might suddenly spring to life and attack him. "Francesca and Damien committed corporate espionage against our family's company," I stated, my voice steady now, cold as ice. "They stole confidential information, sold it to a competitor, and framed me for their crime. They destroyed my career, my relationship with my family, and my reputation in an industry I'd worked my entire adult life to build credibility in." "That's a lie!" Francesca shrieked, jumping to her feet, her composure completely shattered. "She fabricated all of this. She's always been jealous of me, always trying to make me look bad." "Sit down, Francesca." Our father's voice was barely above a whisper, yet it carried the undeniable weight of a powerful command. "Sit down and stop talking." She slumped back onto the couch, defeated. He slowly picked up the documents, one by one, examining them with the same intense, analytical eye he had brought to every business decision over 3 decades. I watched him read, watched his face cycle through a devastating progression, initial disbelief, then agonizing comprehension, and finally, profound, soul-crushing devastation. The IP addresses match, he murmured, almost to himself. The timing, the shell company. He looked up at Damien, his eyes filled with a desperate, unspoken plea. Is this true? Did you sell my client data to Silverline Technology? Damien's silence was a resounding answer. Francesca began to cry then, not tears of remorse, but tears of pure frustration, of a meticulously crafted plan unraveling spectacularly. You don't understand. We were going to lose everything. The house, the cars, Adrian's school. Damien's business failed, and we had nothing left. So you stole from your own family? My mother's voice was barely recognizable, harsh and raw with a deep, personal betrayal. You framed your sister, destroyed her life, and stole from your father? I was supposed to inherit that company. Francesca screamed, all pretense of victimhood vanishing, revealing the naked envy beneath. I was the firstborn, but she came along with her perfect grades and her perfect MBA. And suddenly, everything was about her. I deserved that position. You deserved nothing. I interjected, my voice sharper than I intended. You quit. You walked away. And when I earned my place through 8 years of relentless hard work, you decided to take it from me by force. My father stood up slowly, like a man suddenly aged by 20 years. He walked toward me, and for a terrifying moment, I didn't know what to expect. Another rejection, perhaps, or some final, devastating blow. Instead, he fell to his knees. I'm sorry. He choked out, his voice cracking, broken. I'm so sorry. I failed you. I failed you as a father and as a man, and I don't know how to. The room had gone completely silent, save for my father's ragged, guttural breathing. My mother was frozen on the couch, her face a mask of abject horror as she processed the unthinkable actions of her eldest daughter. Francesca had ceased crying and sat rigid, staring blankly at the wall, like a woman watching her own execution. Damien had buried his head in his hands, his shoulders shaking uncontrollably. I looked down at my father, this man who had seemed utterly invincible throughout my entire childhood, who had built an empire through sheer force of will, who had always been the strongest person I knew. And I felt something profoundly complicated twist in my chest. Anger and grief and love and betrayal, all tangled together in a knot I might never fully unravel. Part of me, a small, dark part, wanted to let him suffer, to step back and watch him grovel, to make him feel even a fraction of the humiliation and abandonment I'd experienced. 6 months of suffocating isolation, of corrosive self-doubt, of crying myself to sleep in an empty apartment, while my own family celebrated holidays without me. Didn't I deserve to see him hurt? But revenge and justice are distinct entities, and I'd already made my choice. I wanted justice. I'd imagined this moment countless times, but the reality was vastly different from the fantasy. There was no triumph in watching my father crumble. There was no satisfaction in seeing my sister exposed. There was only raw exhaustion, profound grief, and the hollow, lingering ache of 6 months of pain that could never be entirely undone. I helped him to his feet. Get up, Dad. We have a lot to talk about. My mother finally found her voice. Francesca, how could you? The question emerged as barely more than a whisper, but it carried the accumulated weight of decades of maternal love transforming into something darker, something akin to revulsion. She's your sister. Your baby sister. I held you in my arms when she was born. I watched you feed her bottles and sing her lullabies. How could you do this to her? Francesca's composure finally fractured completely, revealing a raw, unrepentant core. You want to know how? Because my whole life, everything has been about her. The golden child, the perfect daughter, the one who could do no wrong. I dropped out of college and you looked at me like I was garbage. She gets an MBA and you throw her a party. I try to work at the company and get pushed out. She waltzes in and becomes vice president within 8 years. You weren't pushed out. My father said, his voice hollow, resigned. You stole from the expense account. I protected you from prosecution. You humiliated me. She snarled back. You made me resign like some common criminal, while your precious little princess got everything handed to her on a silver platter. I earned everything I achieved. I stated quietly, firmly. Every promotion, every responsibility. I started at the bottom and worked my way up. You could have done the same if you'd been willing to put in the effort. The effort? Francesca laughed bitterly, a harsh, grating sound. I watched you for 8 years, playing the humble worker bee while Dad smiled and nodded and openly planned to make you his successor. Nothing I did was ever going to be good enough. So yes, I decided to take what should have been mine all along. By committing federal crimes? I interjected, my voice rising. By framing your own sister? By doing what you had to do to survive. The silence that followed was absolute, suffocating. Francesca's raw, unvarnished confession hung heavy in the air, undeniable and damning. Whatever sliver of sympathy her initial plea of desperation might have earned evaporated instantly in the face of her complete and utter lack of remorse. My father slowly straightened his spine, then looked at his eldest daughter with an expression I had never witnessed before. Not anger, not disappointment, but something that looked almost like profound pity. I'm calling the authorities tonight. Whatever happens next is out of my hands. Dad, please. Francesca began, a fresh wave of panic washing over her. Don't. His voice was firm now, decisive in a way it hadn't been since I first walked through the door. You've said enough? More than enough. The aftermath unfolded over the following weeks, a slow motion unraveling. Damien, realizing the overwhelming extent of the evidence against him, confessed to everything: the corporate espionage, the wire fraud, the identity theft. His cooperation with federal investigators eventually earned him a reduced sentence, but he still faced substantial prison time. Francesca, revealed as the true mastermind of the entire scheme, was charged as a co-conspirator. Her lawyer valiantly attempted to paint her as a desperate mother protecting her child. But the meticulously premeditated nature of the scheme, installing remote access software months before the incriminating emails were even sent, brutally undermined any claim of spur-of-the-moment desperation. She was facing serious charges, and her expensive suburban life was rapidly becoming a distant memory. Adrian, my 7-year-old nephew, was the true innocent victim in all of this. My mother, heartbroken but resolute, stepped in to help care for him while his parents grappled with their legal proceedings. I found myself feeling more sympathy for him than I had expected. He hadn't asked for any of this, and whatever the ultimate fate of his parents, he would inevitably carry the profound consequences forever. My father formally reinstated me at Donovan and Associates with a public announcement, explicitly explaining that I had been wrongfully accused and was now fully exonerated. He then offered me a promotion, CEO, effective immediately, with him stepping back to Chairman Emeritus. I accepted, but not without critical conditions. You believed her over me, I stated, sitting across from him in the very same office where he had so cruelly destroyed my world. Without investigation, without due diligence, without even giving me a chance to defend myself. You chose her word over 31 years of me proving who I am. His eyes were red-rimmed and bloodshot. He had aged a decade in the weeks since that agonizing dinner. I know, he whispered, his voice raspy. I have no excuse. I let my guilt about Francesca cloud my judgment. I'd always felt I'd failed her somehow, that I'd driven her away from the company. And when she came back into our lives, I was so desperate to make amends, at your expense. Yes, I affirmed, my voice hard. At my expense. And I will regret that until the day I die. We sat in a heavy silence for a long moment. Outside the window, the city continued its relentless daily rhythm, utterly indifferent to the wreckage of our family playing out in this corner office. I need you to understand something, I finally said, breaking the quiet. I'm not accepting this position because I forgive you. I'm accepting it because this company matters to me. Because I've poured 8 years of my life into it, and I refuse to let Francesca's betrayal steal that from me, too. But our relationship? That's going to take time. Maybe years. Maybe forever. My father nodded slowly, a profound weariness etched onto his face. I understand. Whatever you need, however long it takes, I'll be here. Will you? I challenged, my voice sharp. Because 6 months ago, you weren't. 6 months ago, you threw me away like garbage based on forged emails and your guilty conscience about the daughter who actually deserved your suspicion. He flinched at that. Good. He needed to fully understand that his apology, however sincere, could not erase the magnitude of what he had done. I'm going to implement new protocols. I continued, my voice now decisive, authoritative. Independent oversight for any accusations involving family members. Mandatory forensic review of all digital evidence before any termination decisions. And I'm bringing in outside counsel to review all HR procedures. This company will never destroy another innocent person the way it destroyed me. Whatever you think is best. He conceded, his shoulders sagging. I know it's best. That's why I'm telling you, not asking. The apology was sincere. I truly believe that. But trust, once so violently shattered, doesn't rebuild overnight. My relationship with my father would never be what it once was. That innocence was gone forever. A month after I formally resumed my position, Francesca reached out. Not to me directly, of course. She was under strict legal advisement not to contact me. Instead, she channeled her messages through our mother, who relayed them with visible discomfort. She says she's sorry. She wants you to know that she never meant for things to go this far. She thought when she was established in the company, she could make everything right. Make everything right. I echoed, a humorless laugh escaping me. She stole proprietary information, committed federal crimes, and destroyed my life. How, exactly, was she planning to make that right? My mother had no answer. The begging started shortly after. As her legal bills mounted relentlessly and her assets were frozen pending trial, Francesca became truly desperate. She couldn't afford adequate representation. She was going to lose her house. Adrian needed stability, she pleaded. And how could I possibly let my own nephew suffer for her mistakes? I listened to these desperate appeals through my mother, each one more pathetic than the last. Finally, I delivered my response. Tell her that I hope she finds peace with what she's done. Tell her that I don't wish her ill, because holding on to hatred would only poison my own life. But also tell her this: she had every single opportunity to come to us honestly when she was struggling. She could have asked for help. She could have admitted that Damien was in trouble and that they desperately needed support. Instead, she chose to destroy me. That was her decision, made with full awareness of the devastating consequences it would have for my life. I paused, choosing my next words carefully. So, no, I will not help her. I will not pay her legal bills. I will not save her house. I will, however, ensure that Adrian has everything he needs: education, healthcare, a stable home with our parents if necessary. But Francesca made her bed when she decided to sacrifice me for her own benefit. Now she can lie in it. My mother cried when she delivered that message. She had always yearned for her daughters to be close, to support each other through life's inevitable challenges. Learning that such closeness had been utterly impossible all along, that Francesca's resentment ran so terrifyingly deep she would commit federal crimes to satisfy it, had broken something fundamental in her that might never truly heal. As for me, I've returned to work. I've painstakingly rebuilt relationships with colleagues who believed in my innocence, even when my own father did not. I've implemented stringent new protocols for security and oversight that will, without a shadow of a doubt, prevent anything like this from ever happening again. And every single morning when I wake up, I remind myself that the truth, against all odds, prevailed. It took 6 months, tens of thousands of dollars in forensic investigation, and more emotional pain than I ever knew I could survive. But justice was served. My sister is awaiting trial. My father is slowly learning that forgiveness must be earned, not simply demanded. My mother is grieving 2 daughters, one lost to the cold reality of prison, the other lost to the profound scar of betrayal. And me? I am the CEO of a company that very nearly destroyed me, now running the operation that my father built and my sister ruthlessly tried to steal. Every single day I walk through those offices, I am acutely reminded of how close I came to losing absolutely everything. But I didn't lose. That, above all else, is what truly matters. Francesca believed she could erase me, replace me, become me. She thought our father's love was a prize to be won through cynical manipulation rather than earned through genuine merit. She learned otherwise. I survived. I fought back. And when the dust finally settled, the truth spoke louder than any insidious lie my sister could ever construct. To anyone reading this who has been betrayed by family, who has been unjustly accused of something they did not do, who is watching their entire world collapse around them, don't give up. Document everything. Hire professionals. Trust the process. The truth has an uncanny way of surfacing. Even when those who should have believed you didn't. Even when your own father tells you you're no longer his daughter. Even then, hold on. Keep fighting. And when your moment finally comes, when you possess the irrefutable evidence to prove your innocence, make absolutely sure everyone who doubted you is there to witness it. That's not revenge. That's justice. And sometimes, justice is the sweetest victory of all.